SurePoint Advisors is an investment advisor in Brielle, New Jersey. SurePoint Advisors is registered with the Securities and Exchange Commission. Registration of an investment advisor does not imply any specific level of skill and does not constitute an endorsement of the firm by the Commission.
Welcome to another episode of SurePoint Advisors Financial Roll Call with James Fay. We are 10-8 in service. This is a podcast for law enforcement by law enforcement. I am James Fay. I'm a retired law enforcement officer and now financial advisor with SurePoint Advisors. And I'm focused on helping law enforcement officers make educated financial decisions that will directly affect their retirement. I truly believe that this podcast will help accomplish that. All right, so right from the beginning of this podcast, back in November of 2020, the very first episode, I laid the groundwork for what I truly believe is the foundation to any successful financial plan. And that is the belief that you are your number one asset and your ability to work, make money, and build wealth. And throughout the last several months, we had some episodes that talked about protecting that number one asset. If you remember, we spoke to Ed Esposito about the importance of an emergency account. We had Michelle Clark and educate us about estate planning. Brian Gillespie spoke to us about the importance of mental health and cop to cop. We had Anthony Marone on, who gave us a great education about mortgages. And just recently, we started to talk about investing. We had some episodes on investing. And throughout the last several months, I've been getting great feedback about these podcast episodes and how important they are, and they're creating a call to action for people, which is great. So that's what I aim to do with this podcast in the beginning, and it seems to be working. So today I want to take it in a different direction. I want to talk to you today about investing in yourself. How investing in yourself can have a direct impact on your financial future, okay? So we could talk about health and fitness, right? If you lead a good health and fitness lifestyle, that will have a direct impact because the possibility of you living longer is greater, and if you live longer, that's more money that you're gonna make in retirement. So that has a direct impact, investing in yourself, right? How about education? I know there's a lot of agencies out there that they have great college incentive programs. So if you go back and get a degree, it's going to increase your salary. Well, if you increase your salary and it's pensionable, that's going to increase the amount of money you're going to make in retirement, right? So a college incentive, that's investing in yourself, going back to school while you're employed with your respected agencies to get a college incentive, to get a degree that will further add income into your salary, which is pensionable, which will have a rippling effect into retirement, right? But today I want to discuss the financial impact of being promoted and how it directly affects your pension in retirement, right? So I figured the best way to do this is to interview someone who has risen through the ranks of his respected agency quite quickly and knows firsthand how being promoted can directly increase their financial earnings, right? So earlier in the week, I was able to interview Ed Esposito. Ed is a captain with the Essex County Sheriff's Office, and more importantly, he's the founder of ESPOS Test Prep. And ESPOS Test Prep provides comprehensive training for promotional law enforcement exams. So that's investing in yourself. I think Ed did a great job breaking down some questions that I had for him and to get the information out to our listeners and our law enforcement community. So when I first started to do a little research on this topic, remember I was talking about how being promoted directly affects your pension in retirement. Ed really did a great job of enlightening us on how it actually benefits you while you're employed with your respected agencies as well. And I never really looked at it from that standpoint. So Ed did a great job of breaking that down. So take a listen to this interview. I think it's well worth a listen. Welcome to another episode of SurePoint Advisors Financial Roll Call with James Fay. We are 10-8 in service. This is a podcast for law enforcement by law enforcement. I'd like to welcome Ed Esposito to the podcast. Ed is currently a captain with the Essex County Sheriff's Office and more importantly, the founder of ESPOS Test Prep. ESPOS Test Prep provides comprehensive training for promotional law enforcement exams. So I thought during today's episode, it'd be great to discuss the financial impact of being promoted and how it directly affects your pension in retirement. I figured the best way to do that was to interview someone who has risen through the ranks and really he's risen through the ranks quite quickly and has firsthand knowledge of being promoted and how it can directly increase your financial earnings. So Ed, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Jim. Thanks for having me. And I hope I can answer whatever questions you have, maybe motivate a couple folks to make the financial leap in the right direction. So go ahead, have at it.
Yeah, I think after we go over some of these numbers, a lot of people will be motivated to get in those books and study. So, but before we get into the topic, maybe you can tell our listeners a little bit about your career and how you came to start ESPOS Test Prep. I think that'd be important.
Sure. So I started off in Monmouth County in the jail. That's obviously how we met. You worked in the sheriff's office,
Right.
and I worked down there in corrections. And I had an opportunity, came to Essex County Sheriff's Office. And when I first started there, I was a little bit behind the eight ball with respect to getting promoted or taking the promotional exam, I should say. When I started, when I had my 3 years in, I had just missed the opportunity to take the promotional exam. And at that particular
Right.
time, I engaged a study group. It was Holtz Learning Centers at the time, signed up. I went through the program, even though I wasn't eligible, and I wanted to gain knowledge of what I needed to do to actually be successful when it was my time, knowing I was already going to be almost a full cycle out. So I took that experience. I just kept with it throughout those couple years when it was not our cycle. I ended up coming out the top of the sergeant's list. Short time later, was eligible for the lieutenant's exam. Same thing, put my foot down on the gas pedal, never looked back. Came out on the top of that list. Shortly after, took the captain's test, came out on the top of that list. So altogether, from the time I actually took my first promotional exam to getting promoted to sergeant, lieutenant, and then to captain, was about 6.5 years. And as you know, financial impact over the 6.5 years was quite significant, going from top officer's pay to captain's salary. Huge difference.
Yeah, so it's funny you say that. I know when we spoke, when we were prepping to do this episode, obviously, like I alluded to before, you climbed the ranks quite quickly there in Essex County Sheriff's. And, you know, you actually, although we were prepared for this episode to talk about how the financial impact will be felt in retirement, you really enlightened me about how that financial impact can be felt while you're actually still employed. So maybe you can share that, with the listeners. Thought that was pretty important.
Yes, when I first started out preparing for the sergeant's exam, I knew that the increase in salary between officer and sergeant wasn't a huge amount. It was really the difference in pay from sergeant to lieutenant and lieutenant to captain that really captured my interest on the monetary side of things. Obviously, there's other things that are benefits to promotion, like increased responsibility, different types of assignments, things like that. But in the end, let's face it, everybody took this job for a multitude of reasons. But I think some of the reasons that are always at the top of people's list when they take this job is the salary, the benefit, and the pension. So to sit there and say, well, you took this job and money doesn't mean everything. Money doesn't mean everything, but it makes it a lot more beneficial if you can get financially stable earlier in your career. And whether it's student loans that you're paying off, it's a mortgage, car payment, whatever it is, the more that you can put into your bank account every month and the quicker you can do that, the more beneficial. So to see that increase, like I said, in a 6.5-year span from officer's pay to captain's pay, very significant. And I feel like you see a value, an immediate value on the front end, and then in your pension for the rest of your life.
Yeah, sure. I know, like I said, when we were prepping for this episode and you spoke to that, it was pretty enlightening, the number that you actually came up with, your personal number. So I don't need to share that on this episode, but if that isn't enough motivation for somebody to get in the books and study and put the time in themselves to position themselves for promotion, I don't know what is. So, we both know that the financial earnings impact doesn't stop when you hit that button to retire. Obviously, it goes into retirement as well. So I think we'd be doing a great disservice to our listeners if we didn't discuss the financial earnings impact that getting promoted will have in retirement. And that was my true intentions of this episode. But I really just wanted to touch on, what you brought to light, which was that financial impact while you were employed. But I thought it was interesting. Again, when I was doing the research for this episode, I reached out to my contact there in the state PBA office, and I was able to get the average salaries for law enforcement officers in New Jersey for 2021. So just using these numbers, the average patrolman or the average officer was at about $114,600. So if we use that for an average officer, and he did 25 years and retired at 65%, you're looking at just under $75,000 just to wake up for the rest of your life, right? So just by getting that one bump to sergeant, and the average sergeant pay in 2021 was about $127,000. So there was a difference there, and if you take the 65% of the 127, it's about 82.5. And I know our listeners really can't see this, obviously, because they're listening. So I'm going to try and explain this the best I can. It's tough on a podcast, obviously. But so the 65% of a regular patrol officer to 65% of a sergeant is about an $8,000 difference, $8,060 to be exact. Well, most officers, and I think you would agree, Ed, we're retiring in our mid to late 40s, maybe early 50s, right? So the chances of living 30 years is pretty good with advancements in medicine and everything else. So if you take that $8,000 difference just from your officer to your sergeant and you times it by 30 years, that's about $250,000 difference in your retirement, almost $250,000. So I think that's pretty significant. No? What would you, yeah.
Absolutely. And just to take those average numbers and apply it to my personal experience, and like I said, just going from sergeant to lieutenant and lieutenant to captain in a very short span of time, you're making that same increase that you're referring to on the pension end on the front end. So if you take the difference in $10,000 plus for the average promotion from officer to sergeant, throw another 10,000, a little bit more than that using the statewide average to lieutenant, and then again another 10,000 or give or take to the captain's level. I mean, that is a significant difference. Now, if you can do that in your first 5 to 10 years, make sergeant, the likelihood of you making lieutenant and captain is even greater because now time is on your side.
Right.
That time is basically a force multiplier when it comes to the financial impact of the promotion. And that's, like I said, could lead to other things where you could increase your deferred compensation and other saving for college tuition for dependents and children. So many different things that you could do that are beneficial.
Yeah, it definitely has a rippling effect. And just to bring this home a little bit more, I think I want to give the lieutenant difference and the captain difference in the retirement because it's staggering. And obviously, as well as I do, in order to become a lieutenant, you have to become a sergeant first. And in order to become a captain, you have to become a sergeant and a lieutenant first, right? There's a progressive stage there. So again, using the average numbers, a lieutenant in 2021 is averaging about $138,500 roughly. So 65% of that is $90,000, a little over $90,000 just for waking up. And again, if you take that difference from a lieutenant to a regular patrolman, right, it's $15,594. If you lived for 30 years, that's a $500,000 difference, about $470,000 roughly. And if we bring that into captain, the average captain makes $150,000. 65% of that is about $97,500, which is a difference of $22,971 from just a patrolman. And if you carry that over 30 years, that's $750,000 roughly, just shy of 700,000. So a little bit below $750,000 of $1 million, which is a huge difference. I mean, that's to me, that's staggering. And again, like I said above, if that's not going to motivate somebody to pick up the books and, and study and get promoted, put yourself in a position to get promoted, I don't know what will motivate them, right? That's crazy.
Correct. And I just want to take the numbers you just went over and apply that to somebody's situation where, let's just say, they have a goal to become a sergeant by somewhere in that 5 to 10 year mark. And again, timing is a big thing. Are there spots available? It's not just how well you do on the test. I've seen people come out number one. I've seen people at the top of the list, and there's just no positions there. And we've had situations after the Great Recession where promotions weren't made. You had the Department of Justice consent decree that held up the testing process for municipal police sergeants for a while. So there are some factors that are outside of the control of the person who is looking, seeking that promotion. But if you take the numbers that you explained and you put them into the pre-pension mode, what they're actually going to impact on the base salary, the numbers you gave, you're roughly talking a little bit more than $35,000 a year in salary from the average officer to the average captain statewide salary range. So that $35,000, if you could make sergeant in your first 5 to 10 years and then use the remaining 5 years to make lieutenant and then captain, that gives you in a 25-year career, let's assume you leave at the 25-year mark. Now with the different tiered pensions, you might have people staying to the 30-year mark more frequently. But if you took 10 years of pay at $35,000 more than you would have made, that's $350,000. Throw that on top of the $750 you're calculating into pension, that's over $1 million more than you would have made had you had done nothing.
Yeah,
so I think
that
it's
is
quite significant.
Yeah, that is that's motivation enough for me. That's for sure. I wish I would have had that motivation back in the day. But as you know, I'm a retired law enforcement officer, and as a member of PBA 600, I'm entitled to receive the monthly Cops magazine, and I do skim through it. I do notice that you are a contributor to that magazine, and I did notice in the most recent monthly edition that you had an article about the civil service announcing a schedule for the upcoming promotional exams. And you kind of just alluded to it a little bit before, but can you speak to maybe the schedule that's coming up and what they did?
Yeah, so there's a couple things going on. The sheriff's and county correctional police officer exams that were set to be administered in May of 2020, and the senior level police exams, which would be for police deputy chief and police chief, that were set to be given in June of 2020, were all postponed because of COVID. So those cycles are on hold, so to speak. In February, I know the state PBA is part of an advisory board with the Civil Service Commission. They were working very diligently behind the scenes to get the testing process back up and running, because it is such a very important process, not only for the financial benefits, but it really impacts morale. It impacts the institutional knowledge of different law enforcement agencies. People who have been there for a certain amount of time, they may have specific knowledge, and now you're able to see them advance into other roles within the organization, and then that's how the organization is going to evolve and grow. So there's so many impacts that people don't realize when you just stop the testing process and the promotional process altogether.
Sure.
So they announced in February, and then they kind of refined the announcements a little bit to make some clarifications. If you were in one of those postponed exams for sheriffs or corrections at the county level, they are going to issue in the future, it hasn't been determined yet, a new administration schedule for that. So I would expect that exam to be given before the end of this year. And if all goes well with the vaccine distribution and the restrictions easing, capacity restrictions, even sooner, maybe late summer, early fall. The police senior level exam that was supposed to be in June of 2020, Civil Service has projected or tentatively scheduled that to be administered in September of 21. And then you have the police lieutenants and captains are set to have their applications come out for their promotional exam July 1st. And they should expect to take their exam in October of 21. And then finally, you have the police sergeant's exam. The applications are expected to be out in October of 2021, with the exam being given in February of 22. So a couple of major announcements. Hopefully, the trend right now with cases, as you know, has been downward. Hopefully it stays downward, flat, and continues to decline. We see some more vaccination rollout, and hopefully we can get back to normal, or at least our new normal, and we can continue to open up the promotional process.
Right. That'd be great. A lot of moving parts there, that's for sure. So, that's great information, and hopefully, that will enlighten some of our listeners and the rest of the law enforcement community to start getting ready for this and prepping for it. So I just have one quick question with that. If you didn't have 3 years on when you were originally supposed to take it back in 2020 before the pandemic, but now you do, are you eligible for the sergeant's test? And if you're a sergeant, are you eligible for the lieutenants? And, going forward, that rippling effect.
So that's an excellent question. Real quick thing about eligibility, because sometimes there's a little confusion here. So the first level within the title series, whether it be police, sheriffs, or corrections, is the sergeant's exam. That is 3 years. So 3 years as an officer to take that. The other promotions, it's a year. So a year as a sergeant to take the lieutenant, it's a year as a lieutenant to take the captain. And the reason I point that out is if you haven't researched that and you're an officer looking to take the sergeant's test, you may think in your head, well, how did Esposito do it in 6.5 years, 3 years between each rank? Like the numbers don't line up. I just want to make sure everybody's aware that sergeant's one is the one you wait the longest for. And it's also the hardest in the respect that you have the most amount of people testing statistically for the lowest number of spots per officer, right? So it's the hardest rank usually to get into in a department. But once you've gotten that rank, if you stay with it, it's a year for the next test and a year for the test after. Now to answer your question, if you signed up for the sheriff's or corrections or police senior level test that was announced in November of 19 and February of 2020 for the police senior level test, those exam applications, as per the current civil service announcement, will not be reposted. So they're basically not, as of right now, they are not going back in time to reopen up the announcement. I think, quite frankly, that is striking a fair balance between the folks who signed up and would have been eligible and were eligible back in November of 19 and should have taken the test in May of 20. The pandemic was not their fault. Nobody could see this thing coming. This isn't something anybody planned for. So I think to open up the pool to even more candidates, as much as it may hurt some people to hear this, it wouldn't be fair to the folks who were supposed to take it at the time they were supposed to take it. So if you look at it from civil services point of view, they essentially hit the pause button. Now, with the police exam, since those announcements were not made as far as the applications prior to COVID, those eligibility dates are going to be based on when that exam announcement is actually made. So typically you see for the July exam announcement on the police side, you see a closing date, which is what determines eligibility, of September or October of the year. It's usually September. And then same thing for the police sergeants. It's usually after the application is out, they come up with the closing date. So if you have a police officer who's looking to take the sergeant's test and they'll have 3 years in by, let's just say, October, when those exam announcements come out, they're going to be in a position to take the test.
Okay. All right, that's great. That's a lot of information. I think that clears a lot of stuff up. So just explain maybe to our listeners and the law enforcement community how ESPOS Test Prep can help our listeners with this. How can they help our listeners attain this first rank, which is so important, right? And like you said, probably the most competitive to get to that first sergeant, and then obviously that competition kind of dwindles down because there's less people taking the test, or maybe the same amount of spots or maybe less. But
so for the sergeant, you asked two questions there, so I'm going to break this up a little bit. For the sergeants, police sergeant's exam, sheriff sergeant's exam, what you really need to focus on is building up a knowledge base. And we have a very simple system at ESPOS. It almost sounds too easy to be true. It's called understand, retain, and recall. And that system is the basis for everything else that you're going to do to prepare yourself for the exam. You can come out of the police academy and think you know everything about the law. I'm sure when we all graduated, we thought we knew more than anybody. We know everything about every law that was ever written, every case that's out there, every AG policy, so on and so forth. And then you decide to study for the sergeant's test and you really start reading stuff, because now you're going to get asked 70, 80 plus questions in a limited amount of time, and you have to pick out the right answer. It starts to get more stressful, and the detail that's in all of these laws and policies matters even more. And the understand part is key. And this is really the hardest part for the officer studying for the sergeant's test, to make this transition and make sure that they understand what they're reading and understand what the law or the policy means. Because a lot of times you'll see people read past a word. They'll read past a word and think they know what it means, or they'll read past something, take it out of context. Now you're asked something and you can't properly apply it. So that's the biggest challenge, is understanding. The last two parts of our system, the retain and recall, obviously a lot of repetition. We give you a lot of tricks. There's a lot of long lists and different policies and different statutes that are very, very good to know for test preparation. So that's basically, once you understand the information, that's how we burn it into your brain. And then we give you a lot of good techniques on how to recall that information, personalized mnemonics and different things like that, that will help you extract that information on test day. So when you're looking at one of those two-tier questions that's a full page, your competition is sweating, you're sitting there laughing, because you know how to handle that. You know how that information was put together. You have that information saved in your brain, and you know how to extract that information and recall it on test day. To answer the second part of your question, wasn't really a question, but you threw out a statement, right? So it's the biggest group going into the smallest number per officer is the sergeant. With lieutenants and captains exam, though, it is really survival of the fittest, because you usually have the best test takers getting from that biggest group into that small number to make sergeants. So now when you take the lieutenants and the captain's test, instead of testing against your entire department, your seniority score is actually reset for each rank. So your seniority score for the lieutenant's test is your time and grade as a sergeant. And now you're only taking the test against other good test takers. Go to the lieutenant's level, taking the captain's test, same thing. Your seniority gets reset again in the rank that you're at. And now you're only taking the test against people who tested at least twice very well. So it really ups the game. And I like to say the beginning is kind of like high school sports. The lieutenant's exam is kind of like college sports. And the captain's exam and senior level exams, it's like professional sports or the Olympics. It's, you're only going against the best of the best. So it really kind of refines the whole process out. But by that time, if you're using the system, understand, retain, recall, you're constantly building on your knowledge throughout those three ranks, so that when you get to that point, you really are a fine-tuned machine, just ready for anything that comes at you.
It's great. It's a great point of view, and great analogy is, as you used with sergeant being equivalent to high school, lieutenant college, and captain the pros or Olympics. I thought that was great. And the understand, retain, and recall, I could tell you, I'll definitely be using that in the financial world. We take a lot of tests here in the financial world, and they're not that easy. I can tell you that. They're pretty challenging. So I'll definitely use that technique when it comes to studying for my exams here in the financial world. So, Ed, I can't thank you enough for taking time out of your busy schedule and helping us out with this episode. I think you were the perfect person to interview in order to get this very important point across to our listeners and the law enforcement community. So just real quick, is there anything else I might have missed or something that you want to share with our listeners?
So you're welcome, number one, and thank you for the opportunity of allowing us to share the information. So we have a very capable team at ESPOS. We have people from a lot of different backgrounds and experiences that are part of our group. It's not just me. We have people who have other areas of expertise or specialize in different topics. So the way we break it down is I teach a lot of the legal stuff. We have Larry Holtz from Holtz Learning Center, who combined forces with us shortly after I started in 2016. We have other police captains, other senior level police and law enforcement professionals who bring so many different perspectives to the table. And all that combined we feel we can provide such a personalized level of service, even in a group setting, because we have one instructor has kids. I'm not talking 2, 3 kids, many kids, 5 kids, and he can share his experiences, and he does, with somebody who has 1 newborn child or 2 small children at home and they're having a difficult time. And this instructor can share his personal experiences on how he did it with 5 young children at home. And that is a very important balancing professional life, personal life, family life. It's a fine mix to get it just right, but we have an excellent team. Everybody's always there for everybody that enrolls in our classes. And we think that's something that's very unique to what we do as well. We like to deliver personalized experience and meet everybody's needs and expectations. Thank you.
It sounds like you have, you offer a great value for the law enforcement community. That's for sure. So, well, listen, thanks again, Ed, and stay safe. And I'm sure we'll think of some other episodes that maybe we can get you back on for in the future. So,
thank you again for having me.
Absolutely.
All right, great. I want to thank Ed for his time. He is certainly a busy guy and was able to give me some time for this interview, and I really do appreciate it. 10-11, prepare to copy. Let's go over some takeaways from this episode, right? First and foremost, you're your number one asset, your ability to work, make money, and build wealth, right? You need to invest in yourself to build that and to enhance your financial future as well, right? And how can we invest in ourselves? One of the ways we could do that is putting ourselves in a position to be promoted. And if you put yourself in a position to be promoted, it will have a financial impact not only during your career, but into your retirement as well. And the numbers we discussed throughout that interview, they're the proof right there. So, that's definitely one takeaway. 2, take the time to investigate for yourself when you are eligible to take these exams. Very important. Right? You don't need to start studying or start preparing when they announce the exam. You can start preparing before that, right? Get a jump on it. So I think Ed did a great job of explaining to us how the civil service promotional exams are going to go, being that we're coming out of this pandemic, hopefully, and they're just starting to announce these tests that were postponed because of the pandemic. So again, do your research. Very, very important, right? So a lot of information that Ed gave us. And, if you're looking to contact Ed Esposito or ESPOS Test Prep, by all means, you can look it up, Google it, right? If you need some information from me, if you want to crunch some numbers, if you want to figure out, if you want me to put you in contact with Ed, by all means, call me in the office, 732-876-3777, or you can shoot me an email. My email is on our website, surepointadvisors.com. You can find that in the show notes as well. Put yourself in a position to be promoted. It will have a financial impact not only during your career, but throughout your retirement. And it's quite significant, as we learned through this interview. So with that, this has been another episode of Short Point Advisors Financial Roll Call with James Fay. We are 10-7 out of service.